Hello, I'm Katie Moran, and this is Artistic Spirit, your place for art, mental health, and spirituality. I'm here today with MJ Coppola, a wellness warrioress, author, poet, spiritual awareness seeker, spiritual coach, and the podcast host of Mirrored Wellness. Hey, MJ.
Hey.
So I recently got your book,
Yay.
Demons Cry Too. So it's a book of poetry. It's really beautiful, and I'd really just love to kind of have you share with everyone who's listening about where you came up with the title, what does it mean, and things like that, because I feel like it really captures the essence of the poetry you have inside on the pages of the book.
Yeah, well, thank you. So this book is so I'm going to be 40 this year, and this book is probably about 30 years old before I actually published it. I've been writing since I was like a wee kid. So I had a lot of stuff, I had piles and piles of poetry that I finally, after, and I'll get into this after, but felt safe enough to go through again and really put into a book that, and it was really a labor of love and self-love for myself, and to really go through a lot of the trauma that I went through as a child and as a teenager and in my 20s. I spent a lot of time, like this took probably I think it was 2 full years to actually go through all of the poetry. Like I had to put it down and then take it back up. And so I'll go back a little bit. One of the things, and this is something that you said to me actually, was we were talking one time, I think we were in a coaching session, and you said to me, it sounds like you need to feel safe in order to create. And something about that statement made my brain just go, wait a minute, hold on. When have I ever felt like I was safe enough in then writing? So when I was in high school, a lot of the stuff that I did in high school was very dark. As like, if you pick up the book and start reading, you can tell this is very dark. But I felt safe enough to write that because I had a teacher there who was very, like, my creative writing teacher was amazing. She was the greatest space holder I've ever met. No matter what you wrote, she was always very there for you. And that's when I felt the safest. And so I started to think, okay, so how do I feel safe enough to start creating again? And I kind of came up with a few things, creating a space for myself that I felt safe doing anything that I needed to do. Like my bedroom is like my safe space. I go there to write, to do spiritual things, like that's it. So the book itself kind of, while not a reflection necessarily of my current being, if you will, it was quite a labor to get through, to accept the pieces of me that I used to be. And the book itself, the title, Demons Cry Too, comes from one of the poems in there, but more or less the collective feel of it, that it's okay to have a dark side. It is okay to feel those feelings, because ultimately that's what created this space. As long as we don't stay there all the time. And that's kind of where the safety thing comes in, and feeling safe enough to feel those feelings and like get it all into that creative space. And that looks different for everyone, but yeah.
That's amazing. And I had a spiritual coach who I did some shadow work with, and she said, because shadow work is so triggering for me, she actually said to me, like, if there's something that like brings you into shadow work, make sure you have some sort of symbol that will bring you out of it, so that, like, okay, this isn't the time for shadow work. And like the week we were working on it, like I kept seeing that symbol, and I was like, okay, like maybe sometimes I need to kind of like look into the light and things like that. So I'm curious, because you're a spiritual coach too. What do you want people to know about kind of like these topics and about spiritual coaching? And also, when you work with a client, what do you want them to take away from the practice?
Yeah. So my kind of style is, one of the things that helped me was just to have somebody there. Like and I realized this actually while I was working on the book, that most of my life I could figure it out for myself if I was given the space for someone to listen to me regurgitate. Like, as I was listening to myself talk, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have this, like all of the crap that I've listened to, the people that I've heard. So really, a lot of the spiritual work that I believe that we do as humans is all this stuff that we've done already. And it's just like a bubbling up and a regurgitation, and then be able to like really process it. So really, when you say having like a symbol, for me, I have a necklace that I like. This is one of them, but I do have like a series of necklaces that I have with me, that kind of remind me, like a rose quartz that I have, that reminds me it's okay to be creative, and it's okay to come out of that darkness when you're ready to come out of the darkness, but let's not stay there. So that I hold on days where I feel kind of a little bit like I'm in the shadow, a little bit, things kind of feel dull and gross. um those things it's important to have reminders. So when I do work with clients, it's a lot of, tell me about your process, tell me about the things that are really bugging you, like let's dig into that. And a lot of times, just by allowing that space um to talk it out, or then we can work on what the physical part of it is. But that usually I would hand off to somebody else, because I am not qualified to work on the physical space stuff. But the starting point of it, like, look, I know I have this thing that's blocking me from being creative, from, seeing color in my life. That's great. I'm here. Let's talk. I will be here to hold space, to, we'll practice grounding, and we'll go and we'll see what comes up. Because really, like, shadow work is the reason why it's a shadow, is because it's something we can't see. And maybe somebody else can see it, or, we just have to look, but we have to feel safe. There's the safe thing again. We have to feel safe enough to get there. And sometimes we just need somebody else to hold space for us while we do that. So
Yeah. So about safety, what are some tips you would have for people who also feel the same way, that they need to feel safe to create?
one of my big things is atmosphere. Oh my gosh. If I'm like, I'm a wee bit of I have a hard time being around a lot of people if I'm not in the right headspace. So I like to do my own creativity and my own stuff, like in either my bedroom or somewhere that I've created that space for me to be able to do that. Like, I can close the door, I can be who I need to be. And then when it's done, I walk out of that space. If people don't have like a necessary space, maybe there's like a chair they can sit in, or like, oh my gosh, I've done it in the bathroom, in the tub before, like just like find a space that you can be alone for a moment or two if you need that, or whatever. Another thing that's really, really important is to ground yourself in order to feel safe. Like, I have full days where I don't sit in chairs, I sit on the ground, because I just don't feel, I feel like flighty that day. So I will sit on the ground, and that makes me feel safer, makes me feel more in tune with the world and the earth. And that kind of bubbles up a little bit of like, okay, we can we can do this today. It'll be fine as long as I get to sit on the floor. And I'll do it in weird places, and people will look at me like, why are you on the floor? I'm like, it's comfortable. Just leave me alone. Okay. But yeah, I would say practice grounding. There are tons and tons and tons of practicing on how to ground, but if you find one that's best for you, that's fine. You could do the, carry around something method, like just have intention, sit down, find something. Maybe you're walking around a store and you find like the most random thing. I mean, it could be a stapler. It doesn't matter.
Mhm.
And maybe that stapler like makes you feel happy from that moment. And so there you go. That's your piece, that when you look at that, you know that things are okay. Like you can have intention for that piece to be your grounding safety space, and take that with you when you feel like you want to do some creative work, or do some journaling, because I'm a huge proponent of journaling. Like if you don't have somebody that you could just regurgitate, or even if you do, journaling creates this being able to process things without processing it in the head, which is super important, because getting it out doesn't need to stay in there.
Yeah, I love how you talk about this idea of reminders and self-signaling, especially for people who need to feel safe to create, having a reminder that you're safe and some sort of object or idea that self-signals. That's actually why I created my online boutique, Equanimity Boutique, and it has things for writers. Some say keep writing, invest in your art, things like that. The one I have on today is now is the perfect time. Yeah, so just like this idea that there are so many things you can do to help yourself get into a creative space, whether it's meditation to feel safe, or a reminder, self-signaling like a t-shirt or a necklace. There's so many options, and as long as just like you say, MJ, as long as you have the self-awareness, whether it be from journaling or speaking with someone, getting coaching, like it's so important that you know what you're going through and that you're checking in with yourself so that you know what you need in the next moment, so that you can do the things that are on your heart. You can be productive in a way that's meaningful, and that you feel like you have courage in your creativity.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And that takes time. Like, oh gosh, even like a few years ago, like when I did have some sessions with you and we did work a little bit, I felt like I kind of got it, but then I realized I didn't have it as much. And this is like 2-3 years later, and we're talking, and I still feel like there are days where I'm like, where am I? so so work in progress, but being self-aware is like yeah, it's one of those things, like once you go down the rabbit hole, you can't really go back. So, but I don't know what you would want.
Yeah, absolutely. Self-awareness does open so many doors, and sometimes we don't have people who can be there for us in the way that we need. And I think my most recent podcast episode was Be the Person You Need. And it's just such an important reminder that every time you feel like something is missing, you can give that to yourself. And I think, like, in a spiritual way, so many of us feel like we're missing something that we're going to have in the future. And I think that holding that space sometimes by just putting in the effort that we're there for ourselves first is so important, because especially in the idea of manifesting, you really have to be the frequency of the thing you want. And by giving yourself, whether it be love, support, safety, or even just being a friend to yourself, is so important, because you leave that space for someone to hold that space there in the future for you.
Yeah. One of the techniques that I use when I feel a little bit yuck about myself is I'll sit in a quiet space and I will literally pretend to rip the second half of me away from myself and kind of imagine giving my own self a hug and like talking to myself in that meditative state, like I am a person who I would be loving towards. And that practice has been really helpful, and sometimes triggers full cycles of healing, which is good, but but warning, if you're going to do that, sometimes it can be very intense, but that's been super, super helpful for me. Yep. So.
That's awesome. And it brings me to the next thing I want to talk about. And it's your dream of opening retreat centers. So tell me a little bit about this, because I find it so interesting. I've had so many amazing experiences on retreats, and they're so meaningful to me. And every time I ever hear anyone talk about like the idea of creating their own retreat, it gets me so excited. So I can't wait to hear about this.
That's awesome, because I was just saying, like, I could talk about this for like days. Like, I'm so excited about it. So I'll start at the beginning. So so a while ago, probably like a decade and a half ago, I started to study Buddhism. I found it really interesting. It didn't fit into the social or the religious construct that I was born into, per se. So I found it very fascinating. I did a piece on it for college. And then because I ended up meeting one of the people that ran the center, I got curious and started going, and then just stayed. So one of the things that I used to do is go on these retreats, and they were silent retreats. So it would be like a whole weekend, nobody talks. You don't know a thing about yourself until you're forced to not communicate. It's intense. Let's just put it that way. So eventually I graduated to one of my mentors. Used to go to this cute little place, cabins in the woods, all by herself, and just spend like a week, 2 weeks at a time, solo and quiet. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I could do that. And then one day I was like, I've had enough. I need some space. I'm going to try it. And so I went for a long weekend, like one of the other ones, just not guided. I felt comfortable enough. One of the things I do have to say, though, is that I always had somebody on speed dial in case I needed. And I did need it a couple times, to be honest. One of the things about this place is that there are hosts on site. So even if you don't personally have somebody that can help, at least you have that feeling like you're not alone. Like, even you could be in the middle of the woods and you are by yourself, but within a mile or less than a mile, quite frankly, is, the host, and you can pick up the phone and you can call. For the most part, I always keep my phone off. I only set it to go on a couple times a day, check in, like, hey, I'm still alive. But that experience brought so much growth in my life, to be able to disconnect from the world, go out into nature, like, just be quiet, don't have to talk to anybody, just be with me. And sometimes the growth didn't come during that process. Sometimes the growth came after that. So the process of just being with yourself was huge. And then once you reintegrate yourself into society after that process, you start to realize the things that you do in society that you're like, wow, I'm an awful people pleaser. Like, I should work on scaling that back. But it's not something that I journaled about, talked about in my head to myself while I was on retreat. But being away, being able to like rip that part of me away from society, then being reintegrated, made me realize just how badly it was, how bad it was. So that's just one of many things. But because of that experience, being able to go inward and be quiet and solo, and having a space that I felt, again, safe to be in, knowing that there was somebody on site, close physically, especially if you're a physical touch type of person, that was there to hold the space for me if I needed it. And even if they didn't know they were doing it, I knew that they were there to help, was huge. And as I progressed in life and, kind of stepped away from traditional Buddhist study and all that stuff for a while, I started to really do it every year and every year and every year. And as I did it, I realized that there's a need for it. Like, people need to step away from life. People need to step away from, the phones, the technology, and all that stuff. There's science behind being able to go into nature and what it actually does to you physically, to heal you and bring you back to who you are. And I really, really find it an integral part of healing, as healing your spirit, your soul, your body. Like, the closer you are to nature, the better. And to be able to do that and go inward and go alone, solo, to be able to do it, I think everybody should be able to experience that. I've talked to some musicians and writers, and even like musicians, when they go and they do an album or whatever, a lot of times they'll go in and they'll do it all at once, and they'll kind of lock themselves away and do it that way. And if you look at that model, you realize that, like, how come we don't do that? How come we don't go, well, I have a new project coming up? Writers do it, where they'll lock themselves away and work on the pieces that they need to, and then come out. And I think as just normal everyday, like, even if you're not a writer, like, why not do that once a year, maybe twice a year, where you're just, what I think, in order to change and to be a better version of me, or not even better, like a less I don't know the word. I always like to imagine, like, as we've grown, we like collect all these things that aren't ours, and in like healing, the traditional, like what we call healing ourselves, we're shedding all of that to become like us again. So in order to do that, I feel very strongly that we need to go away. So in this, with all that said, my retreat center dream is to create a space where people can do that, where I will be, me or somebody else will be on site, like as a host, to hold space, or if the person really needs more than just a person to be in this vicinity, there's a space to be able to like bring them in and walk them through things that need to be walked through, and really be in nature, to be able to offer that space up for musicians and writers, to create what they need to, but feel that they're in a safe space, to be alone, but also in a community. So yeah,
Yeah, in my experience working with creatives, it's so important for them to be in community and for them to feel like they're a part of something where they can find support and where they can be a support. And I love that. And when Sarah and I created Creativeville, which is just a Discord community, we do creative sprints and things like that. It was so important to us for us to bring that sense of community and a home for people, that if they do an art of the day, or if they do an art for 30 days, like they feel like they can talk to someone about it. And that's a free community, and I have it, the link in my bio, and it's just so important that people feel like they're supported, because in my journey I didn't feel supported when I started, and it actually made me feel suicidal. I was in and out of hospitals, and it was just so important to me to like find a community and to use art as an outlet. And it was so powerful when I started interacting with people who are other writers, or people who are other artists and other poets. And it was probably the most powerful experience of my life, just connecting with people. And a lot of like what my coaching is about is really the mission to bring that to people, to give them the support I didn't have, so that people don't have to like go through kind of like this dark night of the soul just to get a book out.
That's huge. Yeah. And actually, to bring it back, one of the like first sprints that was available, is like the reason why I started picking up poetry again. So it was like really, really, really important and really super awesome that you guys have that, because it's, I mean, I cannot even begin to tell anyone listening or anyone who will ever listen how important community is. And yes, it's important to go in and be with self and, really be with, the dark side, the light side, like all of it, super important. None of it's bad or good. It's just there. Uh, but it's also really important to be a community, because we're pack animals. We're a pack species. Like we connect with others. It's really important to do that. And it's ultimately the reason that made me start writing again, is because I had somewhere to go where I was like, oh my gosh, because words of affirmation is another one of those things for me.
Me too.
So I was like, oh God, I just need, like, yes. Does it make me sad sometimes that I need the validation? A little bit, but I realized that, like, we're all going to need it. Like it's, I don't think there's anyone on this earth that does not need some form of validation that they're doing something either correct or, you know, whatever it is, even if it's themselves.
Yeah, for me, the importance of community is, especially when you're in the process of creating, sometimes you don't put anything out there for years or months, and you don't get that validation. And I feel like when you're in community and someone, like, you could be working on a book and someone else publishes, it's like you get that validation from community. Like, it's like, yes, like we're all in this together, and like one person's win is the win for everyone. And it's really hard as a creative to get those wins, and your wins aren't consistent. And especially with like wins and validation, like you're not putting things out there every day, for most people, especially writers, because you can't you can't create something in a day. But like this idea that like someone in the community is creating, and like it really just reminds you that like maybe I didn't get to it today, but someone did. And it's like you're holding space in the community and everyone rises. Like when I saw your book, I was like, yes, like it was so exciting. And I read your book before you published it, so yeah, like I really like understood the poetry in terms of the words. And for me, I'm very much like about the words. And I didn't even hold it in my hand. It was just like I felt like the words were living inside of me, because so much of this I connect with, and I've been in these same places that you talk about. And I love when poets put words to things I felt before and things I still go through. It's so powerful for me, and it just lifts me up. And like when you publish this, like I know you say, I know you do describe it as like dark poetry, but like honestly, like I do feel sometimes like there's this lightness that comes with people putting words to these feelings that feel like are unspeakable. And like I feel like sometimes it's a weight lifted off of my shoulders when someone else puts words to it that I felt like I couldn't put words to, or that I felt like there weren't words for it, or it wasn't the right space or place, or I didn't have an avenue to speak these words. And some of my favorite poets are people who put words to these things that seem unspeakable. And I love that. And I love that about your poetry book, Demons Cry Too. So yeah, I'd love to hear you talk about this idea of befriending your dark side.
Yeah. So I want to circle back a little about something you said about how people, it's the poetry. For me, there's a little bit of like neuroscience behind being able to put words to feelings. So to me, poets are magicians. Like they're able, and writers, like anybody who's able to put words to feelings is magic to me. It's magic. Like sometimes it's really hard to do, like on a day-to-day. And so it's funny because on a day-to-day basis, like I will just be doing my like 9-to-5 job, and I'll have to write something, but it's not, like a fun writing. It's like I have to write like a job description or something. And I find myself struggling so hard because I'm not connected to it. Like I don't really want to do it. I don't really know the position, like all that stuff. There's an art to writing when you don't want to write, as opposed to writing when the feeling comes up, kind of thing. But yeah, writers were magicians anyway. So I'll leave that.
I love that.
So the importance of the dark side. I actually did a podcast about this, like way in the beginning of my podcast career, about using the dark side or your yuck feelings for things that you want to do. The way I look at the dark side is this. It is a perceived yuck, which it is kind of yucky. And it's also a perceived bad thing. Like we kind of walk around in a society that expects us to be happy and cheerful all the time. And that's just not reality. And for anybody who struggles with depression or any of the spectrum that goes with, that realizes that there are days like today. I was just telling you earlier that I woke up and I was like, the sun was coming through, and I was like, today I'm going to get some stuff done. I feel great. This is going to be amazing. And it's good. Right. But like 3 days from now, or like, let's even say last week, I felt like crap. Like I didn't want to move. I was just kind of in my own body and my thoughts and my mind. I have learned to ride the wave, per se, where it's like, I try not to judge the reason why I feel that way. I wake up, I accept the fact that today I just don't feel as good as I did yesterday, or it's just not a day. And one of my doctors actually told this to me a long time ago. He had said to me, this is a forever thing. You're probably going to have these like waves forever. It's just who you are, and that's fine. And there is a part of me that like rejects that, but we'll get there eventually. But what he said to me is that when you accept the fact that you're in a slump, you realize that maybe it's not the right time to make major decisions. You just need to slow down. It's like your body's giving you permission to rest. That's kind of the way I look at it, is that maybe there's days where I need to slow down a little bit more. And there's nothing wrong inherently with feeling that way. I actually stopped calling myself broken, because it's really a bad way to say, like, not bad, but it's not skillful. It's not productive to think of yourself as broken. I think of it more like, just because my brain doesn't work the same as society wants it to work doesn't mean it's wrong. And so let's go into how to use that. So the way I kind of describe using the dark feelings, or the shadow, if you will, as something, is like it's like when you have a swimmer, right? And the swimmer comes up to an obstacle, the swimmer turns around and pushes off that obstacle. That's kind of how I look at the dark side, is that this book that I have is quite literally me using my dark side in order to create something. And when it was done, I was able to look back and go, oh, I actually like made it through that. And I made it through, and like I used those feelings to create. I actually feel, and I think this is something we talked about a long time ago, is that I feel more creative in that dark space. And I think this is true for a lot of people, than I do in a lighter space. I could probably talk for hours about that, but I'll keep it short. And then you had challenged me to try to create in the light space, and it was significantly harder for me to do. So I still lean on the dark space creativity more than I do the light space creativity, but I've learned to balance it a little bit better. So using that, it's not bad, but the thing to remember is that we can be addicted to that space. And I know I am and have been addicted to the dark side space, that feeling of yuck, because it kind of it brings a disassociation of what's going on into my life. And it's almost feels like it's easier for me to function, because I don't really have to like be aware when I'm there. But so it's important to remember that it's not super helpful to stay there. So, learning how to get into that space, to use that feeling, those dark, heavy feelings, to create what you need to create out of it, and then being able to come back out of that space, like walk into the light per se, and be like, okay, that's done. Let's do something nice for myself and kind of get out of it. And sometimes it takes a little bit to get out of, but music for me is the biggest portal to be able to like move in and out of those spaces. Like I have a playlist, for a creativity playlist, depending on what kind of thing I'm trying to write. And then I have a kind of a coming out of it playlist, where it's like, it starts off a little bit melancholy, but kind of happy. And then it kind of rolls more into the happy. And by the time I get halfway through the playlist, I'm like ready to go outside and do some stuff. So that's one of the tools I've used quite frequently to do that. So yeah.
I love that so much. And just how the idea of how music can trigger feelings, and also how feelings can be supplemented by music. And that's so powerful. Just the idea of having a playlist. I know I've asked people on Twitter, like if they have a writer's playlist, and everyone said basically that they did. They had a playlist for every work in progress they had and things like that, and they had playlists for so many things. I have playlists for things like even like working out, like just like I know sometimes I'll feel like I don't want to work out, and I'll have it like on my to-do list that day, and I'll put on a song and it'll be like, okay, like I can do this. And it just like it brings you to another place, and sometimes it can give you the power that you feel like you can't muster up yourself, which obviously it sounds so silly, because when you put music on, it's not like someone else is doing something, it's coming from you. So yeah, just that idea, like I feel like even that, like it's another self signal. Like if there's something you want to get done and you like write it down, like you can signal to yourself that it's important to you and that you can put in your energy to do that. And I think it goes back to that idea of safety, like feeling like you're safe enough to do something that you set your mind to, and to do something that you might not feel like you have the energy for. And for me, like I feel like when I'm in that place of whether it be like sadness or darkness, like, or shadow, I feel like it's like writing specifically like brings me out of it. Like I can write myself out of that space, or create myself out of that space. Specifically painting, like I feel like I could be in like a really sad space, and then if I paint, it just changes, like it changes completely how I'm feeling. And even honestly, like even when I put my makeup on, because some of it is like with the brushes, it like lifts my spirit, because it's like a form of expression. And like it reminds me that like no matter what I'm going through, I can kind of like have these creative outlets that change my energy and that allow me to feel some feeling that isn't I want to say like the word threatening, because I think sometimes feelings can feel threatening, and it can impact your ability to create. And I think that's, for me, when I have writer's block, that's what it is. It's this idea that a feeling is threatening to me. And like you said, like going to like a sacred space or a creative outlet for me, I think is really beneficial. But something I do want to talk about, to kind of like change the topic, and get like deeper into like your story, your journey, is your podcast, Mirrored Wellness. So first I want to say, the Mirrored Wellness, your podcast actually inspired me to start a podcast, because like I would listen to you, and a lot of it is, I think there's a phrase for it, but it's like narration. Like it was like you would do these episodes solo, and I haven't done any solo episodes, but your solo episodes would really kind of like, it had this intimacy to it, and so much of the things you were saying, like it's exactly how I felt, and it reminded me like this is what it would sound like when I journal. And like I just felt like, again, like that feeling of like putting words to it. And I think your podcasts are very different from your poetry, because your poetry, I feel like, is very much like it's immersive in the way you feel. And I feel like you put words to feelings, in a very artfully skilled way. And then in your podcast, I feel like it's very much like, how you say, I think, spiritual awareness seeking. Like I feel like it's like you bring up concepts and ideas, and I feel like you put words to the immersion of self-development ideas. So whether it's like you talk about a book, or you talk about like a coaching session, or you talk about just like your own spiritual awareness, like I feel like that is something that really opened my eyes to kind of like, I've been on like this self-development journey, and so many times like I feel like you can really get lost in self-development that you don't go and reflect, and you don't ask yourself, what does this mean to me? And I think especially like in this age of like spiritual gurus, like we don't ask ourselves like, okay, I read this book, but do I like it? Or how do I feel about it? Or was there parts that were triggering? Is there a part of this message that isn't for me, that I shouldn't be implementing into my life? And I think so much of the self-development space doesn't account for, okay, but what's right for me? And so much of it is like, this is the way you have to do it. And if you like think about it, like so many advice books, or self-help books, they contradict each other. And like I think like something that I really want to highlight is that not every book is your roadmap, and not every book is for you, or some messages are for you and some messages aren't something you're meant to bring into your life. But more about how your podcast actually inspired me. So I felt self-conscious, and I didn't know if I like would feel comfortable showing up or hosting a podcast. And I kind of like listened to this Eric Thomas motivational thing, and he said like, if there's something you want to work on, like if you don't know how to write, like invite all the writers you know to a secret party and don't tell them what it's about, and then ask them all about writing. So I was like, I took that as like a literal thing to do. So I invited everyone I knew who had a podcast, and I said, I'm inviting you to a secret party. And everyone actually showed up. I was so surprised. And I said, okay, the real reason I have you here is because I am thinking of starting a podcast, and I want to know what it's about. And you all told me a lot of like technical things, but the thing that was really powerful was the advice you gave me, and how you guys said that it doesn't matter if you feel ready. And you all kind of like gave me a pep talk of like just like putting my message out there, and like that it didn't have to be perfect, and I don't have to like do all this prep work, which I was actually asking you, like, what is the prep work? Like that was my intention. And so much of it was like just about like how I perceive myself, and that I need to give myself grace, and forgive myself for the things that I don't know how to do, and that I should put myself out there. So I just want to give that message to anyone who feels like they're not ready to do something, or they don't know how to start, or they don't understand the technical side, is that sometimes it's taking the leap of faith before you have the skills to do it, and you really develop it through experience. And that's something that I'm so grateful that I had an amazing community of people that I could ask about that, and that I know not everyone has that community, and not everyone has people who have experience in things they want to do. So I do want to share that with anyone who feels like they don't have the support to start something that they don't know how to do. Like, just start it and believe in yourself and learn the skills through doing it.
Yeah, it's really important to remember that, like, when we start something, it feels like there's two feelings that kind of happen simultaneously. It's like exciting because you're starting it, but it's also really scary because in my experience, when I would start something, or like if I'm taking a class and it's really hard, it always makes me feel like, for lack of a better term, I always feel dumb. Like I expect me to know everything all at once. And it kind of challenges your, or at least it challenges my self-worth a wee bit. And it makes me realize just how much I beat up on myself when I don't know something. So I kind of play this game when I'm starting to learn something new, like, all right, how many times can I catch myself calling myself a dumbass today? Like, you know, so kind of, but everybody's like nobody knows everything. Everybody starts off not knowing what the hell they're doing. Like, it's just how it is. So it's good to remember that you're not alone. It's just that way. And yeah, oh my gosh. So going back to the podcast. So thank you, by the way. That's makes me feel good. I appreciate that. And so with my podcast, when I started it, so my friend Jamie had a podcast, and she would tell me over and over, you should have a podcast, you should start a podcast. Like, you'd be amazing at it. Like, you need to start a podcast. I was like, I don't even know what to do. She's like, she like turned her computer on. She goes, go on this website, just record your voice. Just do it. Just go ahead and do it. And I was like, fine, I'll do it. So a couple more weeks later, she's like, did you do it? I'm like, no, I'll do it tomorrow. So finally, she bugged me enough where I did it. And something hit me, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to talk. Like, I don't really have anybody at this particular moment in my life where I could just regurgitate like the things that I feel like I need to say out into the world. So I'm just going to go. And that's what happened. And there's going to be someone out there who's irritated at me because I don't write a script. I never really put any real prep work into it. I just, especially the ones where I'm just talking. But if I have somebody, I obviously do the prep work because that's rude. But I wing it mostly. And I have a friend of mine who every time we go on vacation, she would have like an agenda. That's not me. I'm like the person who shows up that's like, cool, I have an idea what's around, let's wing it. Like, that's my thing. And that's kind of like where the podcast came in, is where I was like eating all of this knowledge over and over, and I was like, I just need to talk about it, like just get it out there, like what helped me, what didn't help. And that's kind of where the podcast came in. I ended up stopping the podcast for a bit just because I wasn't sure where I was going with it, and come in the next couple of weeks, I'm gonna restart the podcast. I'm kind of in the middle of rebranding the Mirrored Wellness a little bit, but so I'm actually really excited to restart it and go back to maybe a little bit of the solo narrative ones. I quite enjoyed those.
I love that, and I find it so inspirational. And I think there are so many gems when someone does a solo podcast episode. Like, you hear people talk to themselves in a way that they are uncovering who they are, their self-discovery, especially for someone like you who believes in spiritual seeking and spiritual awareness seeking. And I feel like it's so beautiful, and I love the intimacy of it, and how when you hear someone talk to themselves, you learn how you talk to yourself too, and you actually like learn more about how you think, and it brings awareness. And like, I feel like specifically when you hear people share their story, you understand more your own story. And there's something about it that I think is so contagious, like something about awareness and opening up and seeking, that really, it opens the listener's voice to who they are.
Yeah, I agree for sure. Hearing somebody else definitely brings an awareness to, oh, do I do that? Or, oh, I do that. Or, whatever they're talking about, if it's a story, like maybe you can relate to part of the story. And yeah.
Yeah. So the last thing I want to ask you about is the idea of accountability groups. So accountability groups are sessions you have with people. Usually there's some sort of link between all of you, whether it be you're all writers or you're all spiritual or you all believe in self-development. So there's like a purpose to the accountability group, and usually you have frequent meetings. A very common frequency of meeting is weekly. So I'd love to hear, what has the power of accountability groups been for you? What have you learned from them? And what would you want someone to understand about accountability groups that might not be something that's common knowledge?
Yeah. So I tried over and over for most of my life to try to hold myself accountable. Doesn't really work that great. I just learned that I'm not there yet in my life, and I accepted the fact that I am not great at holding myself accountable yet. So at some point, it's been 2.5-ish years now, maybe. Finally got into an accountability group. That's where we ended up meeting. And being able to be with a group of people who are like-minded, open, and accepting, to be able to hold space and hold, like, for me, accountability groups is like, I don't want to disappoint that person, like, if I don't do it. That's first and foremost, like the first step. Like, especially if you're a people pleaser, like, yes, can that get you in trouble? Yes. But if you start to learn to use that to your advantage, like if you're a people pleaser and you're part of an accountability group, for me, I was like, I don't want to disappoint these people, so I'm going to do this stuff. And then eventually what that morphed into is, I'm doing this for me and I'm showing up because I want to make the group better as a whole. Like, I want to, contribute to the group. Like, so it kind of morphed, but having that space was so important, like so important. It's the reason why, the creativity accountability group that Sarah and then you have, it was like the reason why I started to write again, because that space was there and I could go every day or whatever. And, during that sprint, it was like, well, even on days that I didn't feel like it, it was like, well, I don't want to be a disappointment, so I'm going to show up. And, in context, if you take it out of context and you heard me say, like, I don't want to be a disappointment, somebody might chime in and be like, oh, well, you're not a disappointment. Well, okay. But when you're using it for, your own trajectory, accountability groups are super important. It's a community, like, and community is really important. Again, we're pack animals. We definitely are community oriented, and to be able to use those things to your advantage is great to be able to do. Like, I cannot say enough about accountability groups, or just community in general, is really, really important, especially for creative people, like you were saying, that to be able to have a space where you can go and just be like, I'm having this issue, or, hey, like today I like published my book, to be able to have that space, and, people can chime in like happy, just raise the collective, for whatever you're doing. And, we need a little bit more of that anyway. in our lives lately. So
yeah, for me, what I feel like accountability groups really do is they give you courage, because I think it's easy to have a dream, but for you to actually say, like, I am worthy of doing this task and doing this task successfully this week, and then for other people to, like, for you to claim that in front of people, and then for them to say, okay, and, like, think it's normal. Like, I think so much, I feel like there's some people, and I've been in this space, who have dreams, but they feel like they're not worthy of the steps it takes to get there. And, like, I think such an important part of, like, being able to validate it, like, it seems like such a, when you first start out, it seems like such like a big thing, like, I'm gonna work on my book today. Like, I feel like that's something a lot of people can relate to, and they feel like they're not worthy yet, or they're not, a lot of people have books that they don't publish because they just don't feel like they're an author, and, like, this idea that people are waiting for that publish button, or that submit button, or that send button. And whether it be like showing up on social media, like creating a podcast, things like that, so many people actually don't find the courage to do that. And I think courage really comes from community, and you feel worthy of the things you desire when you actually start speaking them, and for people to validate that and say, you have this dream, like, I see you and I see the dream, and I don't think there's some sort of conflict there. And I think so many times we are afraid to tell people what our dreams are, because we think people are going to say, oh, you're so unworthy of that. And whether, like, I think a lot of that is subconscious, but I just want to speak to that right now. Like, when you're in community, it's, people don't say, oh, you suck because you didn't hit this goal this week. And I think a lot of times people think accountability groups, they think like, oh, like, what if I don't hit a goal? Like the thing is, people are there to support you. If you don't hit a goal, people will be like, okay, well, maybe you try this next week, and you have a second chance, and you can keep doing it every week to try and hit your goal. And maybe you have like a struggle within, like, actually, like, realizing your priorities, or realizing how to hit a goal, or your micro goals, and people in community can help you with that. And it allows you to step into your courage, to step into your worthiness and your self-worth, and to recognize that you're worthy of the things you desire, and that other people are going to be there to support you, and the people who aren't there supporting you aren't for you and aren't meant to be a part of your vision.
I fully agree with that. Absolutely. Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. Like, it quite literally is like a space to hold the worthiness that maybe you might not have in the beginning. Yeah, that was huge for me as well. Being able to have people look at you and go, no, you can do that. And not being judged if I didn't do it. It was like, okay, cool. Well, it's been 2 weeks and you've said you're going to do this for 2 weeks now, and you haven't. So let's talk about it. Let's, like, maybe you need to scale it back, or what may be the block. And in that space, if you didn't have that, would you really be looking inward to see, like, where the problem is? Maybe, maybe not. But when you're in a community that will kind of respectfully, at least, call you out on your non-movement, then at least you can either sit down with somebody and be like, this is what's going on, or you're now aware of the fact that there's a block somewhere. So
yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Absolutely.
Check out Demons Cry 2. It's available on Amazon, and I'll do a link in the show notes, how you can connect with MJ. So thank you so much, MJ. I think a bunch of people are going to learn so much from this episode on so many different topics, and I think it's really going to encourage people to accept themselves as they are, and befriend those feelings that they feel are unspeakable, and they'll actually bring that into a part of themselves and understand the importance of it.
Absolutely. You are all beautiful humans, no matter what your feelings are, period.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.